What if Europe's quest for energy independence is secretly making it weaker, not stronger? Just a couple of years ago, European leaders stood at their podiums, proudly declaring the end of Russian gas and the dawn of a new, green era powered by freedom molecules from across the Atlantic. The promise was simple: cut off the old pipelines, break free from Moscow, and lead the world in clean energy. But behind closed doors, the reality is far messier. Today, Europe teeters on the edge of industrial decline. Energy bills are soaring, gas storage sits worryingly empty, and factories that once powered the continent are shutting down or packing up for China. The much-touted American LNG, those so-called molecules of freedom, have turned into a golden cage. They're not just 3 times more expensive than Russian pipeline gas, they're also wildly unpredictable. Tankers can change course at the drop of a hat if Asia outbids Europe, and political alliances mean nothing if someone else is willing to pay more. So, what's really happening? Publicly, Brussels talks up the green transition. Privately, European officials scramble for any gas they can get, sometimes through a web of intermediaries in Turkey, Africa, or even Austria and Hungary, who quietly extend deals just to keep their industries alive. The illusion of energy freedom is shattered. Instead, Europe is now hooked on LNG that's both costlier and less reliable, risking its entire industrial foundation. This isn't just about politics or ideology, it's about the survival of Europe's way of life. If nothing changes, the continent could become an industrial museum, its jobs and prosperity exported abroad, while Americans and Chinese reap the benefits. So how did Europe end up trapped in this energy dead end? Let's break down the real story behind the crisis. 2 years ago, Brussels promised a brighter, greener, energy-resilient future. So where did it all go wrong? In the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Europe's leaders took to the podiums with bold declarations. Russian gas would be phased out, replaced by clean renewables and a flood of American and Qatari LNG. The mantra was energy independence, no more reliance on Moscow, no more vulnerability to geopolitical blackmail. The continent would power its industries and homes with freedom molecules from across the Atlantic, while racing ahead with the green transition. For a moment, there was genuine optimism. New LNG terminals sprang up along coastlines from the Baltics to Spain at record speed. Government officials cut ribbons, touting new infrastructure as the backbone of a secure, diversified future. Even as gas pipelines from the east slowed to a trickle, ships carrying liquefied natural gas began docking in European ports, a technological marvel that seemed to promise Europe could have its cake and eat it too: energy security and climate progress, without compromise. But if you looked closely, the cracks were already there. LNG isn't like pipeline gas. Instead of a steady, predictable flow, it relies on a complex web of shipping routes, giant tankers, and global markets where prices can change overnight. If a crisis hits, a storm, a geopolitical blockade, a surge in Asian demand, those ships can simply change course, chasing the highest bidder. Europe's new energy independence was, in reality, a high-wire act on a volatile global stage. March 2026 exposed just how fragile this setup is. A perfect storm hit key maritime choke points, the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, blocking dozens of LNG tankers. Suddenly, the much-hyped tidal transfer facility, Europe's main gas trading hub, saw prices spike by 45% in days. Panic rippled through the industrial sector. Metallurgy, chemicals, machinery. These are industries that can't survive without vast amounts of cheap, reliable gas. But American LNG, by the time it reached Europe, cost nearly triple what Russian pipeline gas once did. And when ships were delayed or rerouted, factories simply had to wait and pay. Let's put numbers to it. In March 2026, the price breakdown for US LNG delivered to Europe was staggering. Around $140 for the gas itself, $250 more for liquefaction and shipping, another $200 for regasification and trader margins. That's over $600 per 1,000 cubic meters at the port, compared to the $250 Europe used to pay for Russian pipeline gas. This wasn't just a price hike. It was a direct tax on Europe's economy, draining corporate coffers and household savings alike. The infrastructure, rushed into service, was also showing its limits. Yes, LNG terminals had been built at record speed. But the continent's internal pipeline network simply couldn't keep up with new flows from the west. In Spain, gas was piling up with no way to move it east to Germany, thanks to missing interconnectors. Meanwhile, the Red Sea crisis meant Qatari tankers had to detour around Africa, adding 2 weeks and another 15% to costs. By spring 2026, empty gas storage meant one thing: energy hunger. The much-celebrated golden cage of LNG terminals had a new set of gatekeepers. Washington and Doha held the keys. The freedom promised by American LNG turned out to be a leash, not a lifeline. For Europe's mighty industrial sector, the consequences were dire. As energy prices soared, German manufacturing, the continent's economic engine, began to sputter. Profits evaporated. Factory closures and layoffs followed. German giants like BASF shuttered fertilizer plants, moving investment to China, where energy was cheaper and more predictable. Even Volkswagen was forced into drastic cost-cutting, with talk of closing iconic plants on home soil. What's at stake here isn't just higher utility bills. It's the very future of European industry, jobs, and global standing. If the continent miscalculates its energy strategy, it faces a spiral of deindustrialization, losing ground to the US and China, perhaps permanently. But the crisis isn't just about higher bills. Let's look at the hidden traps in this new energy deal. What happens when your lifeline turns into a leash? That's exactly what Europe is discovering as it swaps Russian pipeline gas for American liquefied natural gas, or LNG. The dream was energy independence, cheaper prices, and a green transition. The reality? A golden cage, a new dependence, this time with even tighter, costlier strings. Let's break it down. LNG isn't just gas on a boat. It's a global commodity. That means those shiny tankers headed for Europe can just as easily turn around and chase higher prices in Asia if the market shifts. And Europe, desperate to replace Russian supplies, has to pay whatever it takes to grab its share. The result? Spot gas prices in Europe have soared to 5 times what American industries are paying at home. 5 times. Imagine running a factory in Germany, trying to compete with an American or Chinese rival who's paying a fraction for the same molecule of gas. But it gets worse when you look at the numbers. American natural gas at the source, about $140 per 1,000 cubic meters. But then you have to chill it to minus 160 degrees, pump it into a ship, send it across the Atlantic, and regasify it when it arrives. Liquefaction and freight, another $250 per 1,000. Regasification and trader margins, at least $200 more. Total cost, $600 per 1,000 cubic meters, sometimes more. Compare that to $250 for Russian pipeline gas, less than half. That's a heavy premium for freedom molecules, and it's European industry that pays the price. And the infrastructure just can't keep up. Spain has LNG terminals brimming with gas, but the pipelines to transport it to Germany and Central Europe are missing or overloaded. So, while Spanish ports sit on a surplus, German factories are starved for fuel. And then come the shocks, like the Red Sea and Persian Gulf crises, delaying tankers, jacking up freight insurance, injecting even more uncertainty and cost into the mix. Nowhere is this pain felt more acutely than in Germany, the industrial heart of Europe. German heavyweights like BASF and Volkswagen aren't just struggling. They're shutting down plants or shifting investments abroad, especially to China and the United States, where energy is cheaper and more reliable. Volkswagen, for example, saw its profit margin plummet to a critical 2%, forcing the company to announce a brutal cost-cutting plan worth 11 billion euros, including the unprecedented step of planning to close major assembly plants in Osnabrück and Dresden. For Germans, that's nothing short of unthinkable, but the math is relentless. Making cars in Germany has simply become too expensive. And it's not just about big brands. Germany's producer price index for industry is falling, but not because things are getting more efficient. It's because demand is collapsing, factories are shutting down, and production lines are grinding to a halt. Exports, long the pride of the German economy, are shrinking, not from healthy competition, but because German goods can't compete on price globally. When giants like BASF or Volkswagen leave, they don't go alone. Thousands of small firms, suppliers, software providers, service shops, lose their biggest customers overnight. It's the industrial domino effect. One toppled giant can take down an entire ecosystem of small and mid-sized businesses. The numbers tell a chilling story. Even the German Ministry of Economy had to admit that its forecast of just 1% growth for the year is now far too optimistic, especially with Middle East turmoil once again driving up gas prices. Germany has trapped itself in its own energy transformation, abandoning nuclear and cheap Russian pipeline gas for expensive LNG and the unreliable promise of renewables. The result? German products are losing their foothold in world markets. Capital and jobs are voting with their feet, flowing to wherever energy is sensible and affordable. If the industrial heart of Europe keeps slowing, every EU citizen, whether in Paris or Prague, will feel the pain. But here's the twist. Not all of Europe is following this path. Some countries are quietly resisting the mainstream strategy, finding creative, and sometimes controversial, ways to keep their industries alive. So how are places like Austria and Slovakia managing to keep their factories running while Germany pays the price for its transformation? Let's take a closer look at the quiet pragmatists of Europe and the shadowy roots that keep their lights on. While Germany talks ideology, others quietly keep their factories running. How? The answer isn't in lofty speeches or Brussels regulations, but in raw pragmatism and creative backdoors. Let's pull back the curtain on what's really keeping the lights on in Europe's industrial heartland. Take Austria and Slovakia, two countries that, while pledging loyalty to the EU's energy goals in public, have quietly become the champions of survival behind the scenes. In Bratislava, Prime Minister Fico has been blunt. Slovakia won't let energy become a tool for political blackmail. Instead of risking blackouts or mass layoffs, Slovakia extended its supply contracts with Russia or used clever swap mechanisms to get cheaper, more reliable gas. The payoff? Slovakia saves about 90 million euros every single year by sidestepping Western transit fees, money that's keeping its manufacturing competitive and its jobs secure. Fico doesn't mince words. Russian gas is simply the most competitive option for Slovakia right now. Austria tells a similar story. Its energy giant, OMV, is locked into a long-term contract for Russian pipeline gas, a deal so central that breaking it would outright bankrupt the company. Despite the noise from Brussels, 80 to 90% of Austria's gas imports remain Russian. When faced with the choice between economic collapse and political posturing, Vienna's decision is crystal clear. Keep the gas flowing, keep the factories open. But perhaps the most audacious workaround is happening further south, in Turkey. Ankara has mastered the art of energy laundering. Russian gas arrives, gets mixed with flows from Azerbaijan, the US, or Turkey's own fields, and then emerges at the EU's border with a fresh label, non-Russian. On paper, Brussels' new regulations demand ironclad proof that gas entering from Turkey isn't Russian. But in reality, it's a bureaucratic charade. Methane from Yamal is chemically identical to that from the Caspian, and tracking its origin is nearly impossible. Turkey has become Europe's indispensable gas laundromat, leveraging its infrastructure to maximum effect. By March 2026, Turkish pipelines, Blue Stream, TANAP, are running at full tilt, delivering over 500 gigawatt-hours a day to energy-starved southern Europe. Turkish company BOTAŞ has inked a series of new LNG deals with the US, giving Ankara the perfect cover. Any gas leaving Turkey to Bulgaria or further into Central Europe can be relabeled as American or Azerbaijani, even if its true origin is Russian. And there's more. Turkey's own gas production in the Black Sea has ramped up to 20 million cubic meters per day, providing plausible deniability. Ankara can claim, "We export our own gas and use imports ourselves." There's no way for outsiders to verify. The result? By mid-March 2026, Turkey is Europe's backdoor to energy security, a discreet lifeline that keeps politicians' faces saved and living rooms warm. Moscow keeps earning export cash, Ankara profits from transit and commissions, and Europe gets the gas it needs, all without technically breaking its own sanctions. But this grey market comes at a price. These creative workarounds save industries for now, but they undermine the EU's legal and moral credibility, deepen dependence on a tangled web of intermediaries, and expose cracks in European unity. Every loophole exploited is another chip in the continent's sovereignty and another step away from true energy independence. So, as the official narrative celebrates freedom molecules and green transitions, the real power lines are being redrawn behind closed doors. The question now is, who really holds the keys to Europe's energy, and who stands to gain the most from this new order? Let's dig deeper. Is America helping its ally, or quietly gutting its rival? That's the uncomfortable question echoing louder across Europe's industrial heartlands. On the surface, you see smiling summits and big talk of transatlantic unity. But beneath the handshake photos, the numbers and the consequences tell a different story. Let's follow the money and the molecules. Since Europe turned its back on Russian gas, American LNG has surged to cover the gap. As of March 2026, the US now supplies a staggering 45% of the EU's imported liquefied natural gas. But these aren't the secure long-term contracts European industry once relied on. American LNG deals are short-term, flexible, and, crucially, cargoes can be diverted elsewhere if Asia offers a better price. That leaves Europe exposed. If global prices spike, tankers veer away, and Europeans must outbid the world just to keep the lights on. It's not just the volume, it's the price. American manufacturers buy gas at around $4 per million BTU. In Europe, the same gas costs between $12 and $18. For energy-intensive sectors, chemicals, steel, fertilizers, this is a death sentence for competitiveness. Factories that drove Europe's prosperity are halting investments, downsizing, or moving offshore. By March 2026, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act is fully operational, dangling huge tax breaks and direct subsidies to any company willing to relocate clean tech production stateside. When you add dirt-cheap energy to that package, it's no wonder industrial giants like Northvolt or century-old steelmakers are mothballing projects in Sweden or Germany and opening plants in Texas or Ohio. This is the new transatlantic reality. The U.S., under the banner of protecting Europe from energy blackmail, has quietly installed its own leash. Washington can now turn a dial and squeeze Europe's industrial lifeblood without firing a shot. If relations with the White House sour or a new administration wants leverage, Europe could suddenly face a physical energy shortage. That's not partnership, that's dependency. European leaders still praise unity for the cameras. But in boardrooms and union halls, a different mood is taking hold. Resignation, even a sense of quiet capitulation. The continent is stuck between the hammer of soaring energy prices and the anvil of American subsidies. And as factories and jobs slip away, the future of European industry, its ability to innovate and compete globally, is at stake. But here's where the story takes an even grayer turn. Officially, Europe is phasing out Russian gas, with new rules banning short-term LNG contracts as of April 2026. Yet, almost half, 49%, of Russia's LNG exports are still quietly flowing into European ports. How? Loopholes and creative accounting. In Turkey and India, Russian gas is offloaded, mixed with clean fuel in storage tanks, and re-exported under a new flag, now technically not Russian on the paperwork. 14 such shipments slipped easily into the EU from Turkish terminals by March 2026. The pipeline game is even slicker. Russia supplies gas to Azerbaijan for domestic use, freeing up Azerbaijan's own gas for export via Turkey to Europe. The molecules are the same. The flag on the invoice changes. Brussels keeps its image clean, while European factories get methane that's 30% cheaper than American LNG. Even as the EU celebrates its new regulations, the cash keeps flowing. In the first months of 2026, Europe paid nearly €1 billion to Moscow for fossil fuels. Talk of full isolation rings hollow when those payments still fill Russian coffers. The result? A Europe that talks sovereignty, but acts out of desperation. Every step toward energy independence has only deepened the continent's dependence on Washington's goodwill and the intricate games of intermediary states. Energy policy, sold as liberation, has become a golden cage. So, what can Europe, and the rest of us, learn from this tightrope act? Is there a way out of the golden cage, toward a new, sustainable balance? The era of ideological gas is over. Now, every cubic meter is weighed for survival. Europe's energy debate isn't about values or the green future anymore. It's about who keeps the lights on, who keeps factories running, and who holds the real power. Europe set hard deadlines. By April 2026, no more Russian LNG through short-term contracts. But behind closed doors, the story is very different. Brussels quietly updated its rules, giving member states a backdoor. When energy security is at risk, countries can bend the rules, authorizing imports as they see fit. And when gas prices spiked 50% in early March after conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran, that risk suddenly became all too real. So what does this new gray market look like? In Turkish and Indian ports, Russian LNG is unloaded, stored, and blended with clean fuel. On paper, the resulting mix is no longer Russian, and it slides smoothly into European ports. By March 2026, at least 14 such shipments had entered the EU from Turkey alone, without anyone raising a finger. The pipeline game is even subtler. In back channels, European lobbyists are hammering out deals with Azerbaijan. Here's how it works. Russia supplies Azerbaijan with the natural gas it needs at home. Azerbaijan, in turn, frees up its own production to send to Europe via Turkey. The molecules don't change, but the flag on the documents does. Europe gets gas that's 30% cheaper than American LNG, factories stay afloat, and Brussels gets to keep up appearances. But let's be honest, this is quiet capitulation. The numbers speak for themselves. By mid-March 2026, the EU is still Russia's biggest LNG customer, taking nearly 49% of all Russian exports. In February alone, payments to Moscow for fossil fuels approached €1 billion. So much for complete isolation. European companies are still topping up the Russian budget, even as leaders talk tough in public. Why all this sleight of hand? Because the European social model, the jobs, the welfare, the sense of economic security, can't survive without Eastern gas. In the back rooms of the European Council, Central European leaders put it bluntly. If we can't find a way to legalize this gray import, our economies won't make it through the next winter. Europe is trying to sit on two chairs, publicly condemning, secretly buying, but this game can't last forever. So, here's the real question. What's the true price of Europe's energy pivot? Is it a future as a deindustrialized periphery, watching its factories and jobs drift away to the US and China? Or is it the difficult path back to pragmatic energy policy, where survival outweighs political signaling? Europe isn't the confident industrial powerhouse it was just 5 years ago. It hasn't collapsed, but it's changed. Poorer, more dependent, and crucially, much more pragmatic. The old era of gas politics is officially dead. From now on, every cubic meter of methane is measured against survival, not ideals. The attempt to swap all pipeline gas for LNG failed. It came at the cost of industrial sovereignty. As of March 2026, EU storage sits at just 28% capacity, with prices triple those in America. This, right here, is the real price of the energy transition. Germany, for example, has resigned itself to the role of a fading giant. Some of its chemical and automotive industries have permanently relocated to the US and China. Berlin will keep buying expensive American gas, but it's also laying down new pipelines to southern hubs, hedging its bets. Turkey, meanwhile, is cementing its status as the indispensable energy bridge. The future balance of power in Europe will be shaped not just by who controls supply, but by who's willing to be honest about their needs, and who's brave enough to make difficult, pragmatic choices. The time for slogans and double standards is over. Now, every decision comes with a real, tangible cost. The old world must choose: retreat into managed decline, or embrace a new, unvarnished realism in energy policy. The golden cage of freedom molecules is real. And if Europe doesn't face the truth about its energy needs, it may find the door has locked behind it forever.